What's your sense, Sonal? I mean, most people talk about how for the world, this is a completely different cycle than what it has been in the past 30 or 40 years in terms of what rates are showing about how they'll stay. What are your thoughts around there, and how does India fare within that landscape?
So the global backdrop actually is the biggest challenge India faces for next year. And as you said, the synchronized policy tightening we've seen globally this year has been quite significant in the light of high inflation. And I would say importantly, even as there are signs that, for instance, the industrial sector, export growth across a number of countries, housing market in the US, so signs of slowdown clearly visible, yet central banks still looking to hike rates, maybe at a slower pace, but continuing to hike rates and stay at that restrictive territory through most part of 2023. So from our standpoint, we think that 2023 is going to be a year where globally GDP growth is going to disappoint on the downside. We are expecting recession in US, Europe, as well as some of the countries which are more housing driven and where mortgage rates have increased materially. So the likes of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Korea. So essentially, it's a synchronized slowdown with recession in some of the advanced economies. Now, China, of course, is seeing sort of a delayed reopening and therefore seems better off compared to rest of the bloc. But from a demand standpoint, I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for India in 2023.
Um, the belief is that while and I would love to understand about okay, let me try and actually talk about that first. So now, in light of how people look at different economies, and I was talking to Rob a few days back, your colleague Rob, and he was saying that if we look at India versus how India might have been, it will not look as great. But when you look at India vis-a-vis what a lot of other emerging market economies are doing, it might seem a lot better. How would you, in your prism, look at India in that landscape, therefore?
So, it really depends on what perspective one is taking. But I think the relative comparison of, let's say, a domestic demand driven India versus an export driven, let's say, Singapore or South Korea, clearly in a recessionary backdrop, some of the export oriented open economies will be hit a lot more. Some countries, for instance, in Korea, we think growth will in fact contract in 2023. So compared to that, some of the more domestic demand-driven economies, India is one of them, but also the likes of Indonesia, where growth rates will slow down, but will still on a relative basis stand out. On an absolute basis, though, I think this idea of decoupling is raked up ahead of every slowdown, never works out. And that's something that we think will also play out in 2023. So our calendar year 2023 real GDP growth for India is around 4.5%. You compare that to, I think the consensus right now is closer to 6%. So relative to 2022 and relative to expectations for 2023, we do think it's going to disappoint. Why? Because one, of course, the export demand is going to weaken even further, despite the rebound we've seen in the November exports. Two, importantly, the investment cycle is closely linked to outlook for demand, certainty, and how financial conditions are. And all those three actually take a hit when you are in a synchronized global growth downturn. So we do think we will start seeing investment related indicators actually slow down in India. And some of the small and medium enterprises which are more export oriented are also labor intensive. So there is some spillover on the consumption side, job side as well because of the export slowdown. So I would say, like on a relative basis, India versus some of the open economies, India stands out as being better off. But there is no decoupling. There will be also a growth hit for India.